There's a lot more richness in a life where you have 5 things operating at 80%, but you're not operating at any of them at 150%.
And lots of times you see people sacrifice themselves to their reputation. Many 19-year-old girls, I've talked to many of them, believe that their career is going to be the most important thing in their life. Very few 30-year-old women believe that, even if they have high-powered careers, because they tend to discover that high-powered careers come at a substantial cost, like 60, 70-hour work weeks, etc.
Hey there! It's hard to find good help for many people today. With so much information, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, and that you don't have any way to sift through the noise. Luckily, motivational speakers can help. Subscribe to us for endless motivation.
What are the important life tasks? Like, okay, so you should get educated to the approximate level of your intelligence. You should be employed gainfully, have a job, or maybe if you're lucky, a career. You need an intimate relationship. You should have some friends. You need a family. You need to regulate the world of temptation, drug and alcohol use, that sort of thing. You have to take care of your health. You need to make some productive use of your time outside of work. So there's 8 things. Well, let's take one. You're going to have a family, an intimate relationship, and a family. Well, the classical way of doing that is that someone's male and someone's female, and they get together and they have children, and then they have grandchildren, and that's like a third of your life. By playing out male and female, it's sort of like you've now occupied 25% of your time productively. That's the role. Okay, let's say we blow that apart. Well, then what? What are we supposed to do then? Because you can't pretend that into existence.
If you concentrate solely on your career, you can get a long way in your career. And I would say that that's a strategy that a minority of men preferentially do. That's all they do. They work like 70, 80 hours a week. They go flat out on their career. They're staking everything on the small probability of exceptional status in a narrow domain. But it's hard on them. They don't have a life. It's very difficult for them to have a family. They don't know how to take any leisure activity. Like, they get very one-dimensional. Now, it may be that unidimensionality is the price you have to pay to be exceptional at one thing, right? Because if you're going to be something like a genius-level mathematician, and you want to do that or a scientist, say, it's like, you're in your lab all the time, you're working 70 hours a week or 80 hours a week, you're smart, you're dedicated, you're unidimensional, and that's how you get to beat all the other people who are doing that. It's the only way. But the problem is you don't get a life. Now, if you love being a scientist and you have that kind of focus of mind, well, first of all, you're a rare person, and second, you're going to pay for it. But fine, more power to you. But it's a risky business to do that. You sacrifice a lot for it. And I would say most often, if you're speaking about having a healthy life, that isn't what you do. You spread yourself out more. So, you have a family, you have some things that you do outside of work that are meaningful to you and useful. You have a network of friends. Those 3 things alone, or 4 things alone, are plenty to keep you well oriented. And then if one of those things collapses, everything doesn't go. Now, the price you pay for that is the more you strive to optimize that balance, the less likely you are to be fantastically successful at any single one of them. But you might have a very, if you consider your life as a whole, that might be a winning strategy. One of the things Carl Jung said, I really liked this. He thought that men went after perfection and women went after wholeness. So they're different value, they're different, there's something different at the top of the value hierarchy. So perfection would be stake it all on one thing and look for radical success. Not that all men do that, because they don't, but we're talking about extremes, at least with regards to the men that do that. The wholeness idea is more like, well, I want one thing in my life to be 150%, or I want 5 things in my life to be 80%. Well, there's a lot more richness in a life where you have 5 things operating at 80%, but you're not operating at any of them at 150%. So, and I really believe this because I've watched men and women go through their careers now for a long period of time, and one of the things that, there's lots of things that produce this, But one of the things that I've noticed is that mostly women in their 30s bail out of unidimensional careers. They won't do them. They won't put in the 80 hours a week that they would have to put in order to dominate that particular area. And it isn't, the reason that they won't do it is because they decide it's not worth it. And no wonder, because why would that be worth it? You have to ask yourself that. It's like, well, you want to be an outstanding scientist. It's like, okay, really, that's what you want? Because that means that's what you do. Because you're competing with other people, you know, they're smart, they're hardworking, and if you want to be at the top, you have to be smarter and work harder than any of them. And working hard means working long hours. I mean, it also means working diligently, but in the final analysis, it's also an additive issue. If I'm smart and hardworking and I can crank out for 70 hours a week, and you do it for 30, it's like, in 2 years, I'm so far ahead of you, you will never, ever catch up. So, anyways. And I think maybe part of the reason too that women are oriented that way more than men, I think there's two reasons. One is socioeconomic status does not make women more attractive on the mating market, but it does make men more attractive. And the second is women's time frame is compressed, right? Because guys can always say, well, I'll have kids later. And they can say that till they're like 80. Whereas women, it's like, no way, man, you got to get it together by the time you're, let's say 40, but really probably by 35, but definitely by 40, because otherwise it ain't happening. And that's bloody dreadful. Like the most unhappy people you ever see. One of the common routes to extreme unhappiness is to want children and not have them. I wouldn't recommend that. You know, you see couples who are in their 30s. 1 couple in 3 over the age of 30 has fertility problems. That's defined as inability to conceive after 1 year of trying. 1 in 3. So it's worth thinking about, because people are very, very unhappy if they want to have kids and then they can't. Man, you're in the medical mill for 10 years if that's what happens to you.
If you have a reputation that has a life of its own, it becomes very difficult to distinguish between yourself and that reputation.
Sure.
And that's one of the pitfalls of fame. And lots of times you see people sacrifice themselves to their reputation. You see celebrities becoming impersonators of themselves.
Yes.
And it's a tragic fate, I would say. Many 19-year-old girls, I've talked to many of them, believe that their career is going to be the most important thing in their life. Very few 30-year-old women believe that, even if they have high-powered careers, because they tend to discover that high-powered careers come at a substantial cost, like 60, 70-hour work weeks, etc. And so that life might be best spent in the bosom of family and friends and with children, etc. That's where much of the true value is. And most women figure that out by the time they're in their 30s, which is why high-powered law firms, for example, have a hell of a time retaining their extremely competent and highly valuable women. No one likes to talk about this. They wouldn't talk about it in the law firms that I consulted for, many of them. All the women would talk about it privately. The discussion was always about how the law firms weren't doing enough to support women with their children. And all the women knew that wasn't true. That wasn't what was going on. And the law firms were bending over backwards to try to accommodate them because they wanted to keep their high-performing women for obvious economic reasons. Everybody should be equal. It's like, well, wait a second. We trade on our inequality. You're better at something than I am at something, and that's an inequality. And you might even say, well, you became unjustly better at that than I did, for historical reasons. But the fact of the matter is that inequality exists, so let's try to address it. Well, one way of addressing it would be for me to get as good as you are at that thing, but the other way would be for me to do what I'm good at, and for you to do what you're good at, and for us to trade. And then if we have money, well, we can transform the value of our labor into something that's universal, and that is an equalizing force in and of itself.